The morning sun had not yet broken through the pale mist that clung to the hills, and the ground was still cool beneath the soles of her bare feet. 9-year-old Luda May moved quietly through the grass, the handle of the iron bucket biting into her small, calloused hand. Dew clung to her ankles, mixing with the dust that never truly left the land. The path to the creek wound half a mile across a patch of scrub and mesquite, long enough to remind her how far she and her mother lived from anyone who might help. Each step made the metal bucket rattle faintly, an echo in the quiet dawn. Above her, a hawk circled once, crying out against the silence, then disappeared into the gray horizon. Her mother, Ada May, had coughed all night again. The sound of it, low, wet, and hollow, still rang in Luda's ears. Ada May's body was frail now, bones pressing through skin that had once been strong from carrying wood and water, from dancing around a fire before sickness and grief took everything. Luda knew better than to cry. Crying only made her mother weaker. Their cabin stood alone at the edge of Red Creek territory, too far for company, close enough for gossip. Folks in town called it the Apache woman's shack, and they crossed the street whenever Ada May came by to trade her baskets or herbs. She should have gone back to her people, the butcher's wife once said loud enough for everyone to hear. But Luda's mother never bowed her head. "My husband died on this land," she would answer softly. "That makes it mine too." Tom Whitfield, her late father, had been a white ranch hand who believed peace could be built on kindness. He'd been trampled by a horse 2 winters back, leaving Ada May to raise their daughter between two worlds, belonging to neither. Now the little girl fetched water every morning alone, because no one else would. The creek shimmered faintly under the early light. The surface rippled as she dipped the bucket in. It filled with a satisfying weight, water sloshing against the rim. Luda paused, staring at her reflection. Brown eyes, dark braids, the same quiet strength she saw in her mother's face. She whispered something in Apache, a small prayer of thanks to the spirit of water, then started the long walk home. Halfway across the field, the wind shifted. The hair on the back of her neck lifted. Someone was watching her. She froze. High up on the ridge stood a man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dust-colored coat that blended with the hills. His horse, a dapple gray named Dusty, stirred slightly beneath him. The man didn't move. He just watched her. Luda's heart beat fast. Her first thought was cavalry, soldiers who sometimes rode through to drive out strays. Her second thought was outlaws, the kind her mother warned her about. But there was something different in the way this man sat his saddle. Still, patient, not threatening. The iron bucket trembled in her hands. For a long moment, the two simply looked at each other through the pale morning haze. An Apache child, alone in the open, and a stranger from the world that had tried to erase hers. Then the man tipped his hat, slow and respectful. A faint glint of sunlight flashed on the brass buckle of his belt. He turned Dusty and rode off toward the far hills, never saying a word. Luda stood there, unsure if what she felt was fear or something softer, something she couldn't yet name. When she reached the cabin, Ada May was awake, sitting against the wall by the small stove, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, mixing with the smell of pine pitch and ash. "Did you see anyone?" her mother asked, her voice rough from coughing. Luda hesitated. "A man on a horse, up by the ridge." Ada's eyes sharpened. "Soldiers?" "No, I think he was one of them from the big ranch." Ada's lips pressed together. "Elias Whitfield," she said finally, more to herself than to the child. "His father owned half this valley before the war." She coughed again, then added, "Keep your distance, Luda. Folks like him don't see us as neighbors." Luda nodded, though something in her chest whispered otherwise. She poured the water carefully into the clay basin. The sound of it filled the room, soft, steady, alive. Her mother washed her hands, the water turning gray almost instantly. "Rest, Mama," Luda said. "I'll gather firewood before the sun gets high." Ada smiled faintly. "You're too much like your father, always trying to fix a world that's already broken." The rest of the morning passed in stillness. Cicadas buzzed in the distance, and the smell of hot dust drifted through the open window. Luda hung strips of drying meat under the eaves, swept the dirt floor, and tried not to think about the man on the horse. But when she stepped outside to bring in the wash, she saw hoof prints, fresh, clean, pressed deep into the earth near the path. Alongside them lay a small burlap pouch. Inside was a piece of cornbread, still warm, wrapped in cloth. Her breath caught. She looked around. No one. Only the wind. "Mama," she called, rushing inside. "Someone left this by the fence." Ada stared at the bread, then at her daughter. "Don't touch it," she said sharply. "Could be a trick." Luda hesitated. The smell was sweet, like home, like something she hadn't known in months. Ada sighed, the anger draining from her face. Men like Elias think charity makes them holy. Don't be fooled by kindness you can't eat twice. Still, when Ada turned away, she broke off a small corner and put it to her lips. For a heartbeat, Luda saw the woman her mother used to be. Strong, alive, laughing beside her father under a wide Texas sky. That night, the moon rose thin and sharp. From the window, Luda could see the faint flicker of a campfire far up the ridge. The direction the man had gone. A single light in a sea of darkness. She sat on the porch step, hugging her knees, listening to the lonely cry of coyotes echo through the hills. Somewhere out there, a stranger had chosen to see her, not as a ghost of a dying people, but as a child who still mattered. It was a small thing, but in a place where kindness had all but vanished, even the smallest spark could feel like a sunrise. The next morning, as she set out with her bucket again, Luda looked once toward the ridge. The fire was gone, and the land lay quiet. But she whispered anyway, softly in Apache, so only the wind could hear. "Thank you, whoever you are." And for the first time in a long while, the iron bucket in her hand didn't feel so heavy. The morning came dry and quiet, with a thin line of gold spilling over the ridge. Dust hung in the air, unmoving, as if the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. When Luda May stepped out of the cabin with her iron bucket, she almost didn't see it at first. A small burlap sack and a leather water flask sitting neatly by the narrow path that led toward the creek. The burlap was tied with a strip of horsehide. No note, no tracks close enough to follow, just the deep, fresh hoof prints pressed into the dirt where the morning light hit them. Luda froze. Her pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and fear. She bent down and untied the cord. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth that smelled faintly of smoke, lay 2 thick slices of cornbread, dry but still soft at the center. She lifted the edge of the water flask, felt its weight. It was full. Someone had left them for her. She looked toward the ridge where she'd seen the horsemen the day before, but the hill was empty. The sun burned low and cold behind it, and the sky carried that pale, endless hue that always made her feel both small and alive. When she brought the things inside, Ada May was sitting by the stove again, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The cough had returned, short, sharp, and tired. "Where'd you get that?" she asked, voice thin as paper. "By the trail. Someone left it there." Ada stared at the sack for a long moment. Then, with a small sigh, she said quietly, "You know who it was?" Luda hesitated. "Elias Whitfield." Her mother nodded. "Don't eat it yet." "Ah, but Mama." Ada's tone hardened, though her eyes were soft. "Kindness from a white man, baby girl, always comes with a price. Might not be today, might not even be his doing, but it'll come due." Luda looked down at the bread in her hands. It smelled good. Cornmeal and lard. The kind she hadn't tasted since her father died. Still, she said nothing more. She wrapped it back up and set it aside. By mid-morning, the air grew warm and restless. A dust devil danced across the dry plain beyond the fence, twisting up bits of hay and broken twigs. While Ada rested, Luda swept the yard and checked the small traps near the creek. When she returned, another surprise awaited. A neat stack of split firewood leaned against the side of the cabin. The cuts were clean even, a rancher's axe, not a settler's. She touched one log. It was still warm from the blade. Her mother said nothing, but when Ada stepped outside later and saw it, her lips trembled. Not from anger this time, but something closer to shame. "Man must have worked half the night," she whispered, "for folks he don't even speak to." That evening, as Luda helped her mother wash her face, Ada's hand lingered on her cheek. "The world isn't just cruel, child. It's complicated. Don't ever forget that." The next day brought a new visitor, Martha Johansson, the preacher's wife from Red Creek. She arrived in a squeaky wagon just before noon, her bonnet crisp and spotless, her son Clay sitting beside her, with a rifle laid casually across his lap. Luda was outside grinding corn when the wagon stopped. Martha stepped down, adjusting her gloves like she didn't want to touch the same dirt the Apaches walked on. "Well, I finally decided to come and see how you're doing, Ada," she said, smiling thinly as she ducked into the low doorway. "We've been so worried." Ada coughed and nodded, polite as always. "Appreciate the thought, ma'am. We get by." Martha glanced around the one-room cabin, her eyes lingering on every crack, every empty shelf. "You poor thing," she murmured. "It can't be easy living all the way out here, just you and the girl." Ada gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've known harder days." "I'm sure you have," Martha said quickly, smoothing her skirt. "But Ada, folks in town are talking. That piece of land you're sitting on, it's dry, it's dangerous. You can't farm it. I'd hate to see something happen. My husband and I would be willing to take it off your hands, at a fair price." Luda stopped grinding corn and turned. The rhythm of the stone had fallen silent. Ada's face stayed calm, but her tone carried the weight of steel. "This was my husband's land. He died here. I'm not selling." Martha's smile thinned. "Oh, Ada," she said sweetly, "it's just dirt. You can't live on pride." "I don't," Ada replied. "I live on promises." Something flickered behind Martha's eyes, irritation, then cold resolve. She rose from the stool and brushed off her dress. "Well," she said, stepping to the doorway, "suit yourself. But remember this. Around here, things have a way of being taken when they aren't given." Outside, Clay Johansson spit into the dirt and laughed under his breath. "See you around, Apache girl," he said as Luda met his gaze. The wagon creaked away, leaving a long trail of dust behind it. That evening, the wind began to howl across the hills. It brought with it the scent of rain that would never come, and the distant cry of a lone coyote echoing from the canyon. Ada sat by the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she mended a tear in Luda's dress. "She'll be back," she said softly. "Not for us, for what's under our feet." Luda looked toward the dark outline of the ridge. "What if he comes back too?" Her mother followed her gaze, and for a long time they sat in silence, watching the horizon. At last Ada said, "Maybe mercy ain't always something you ask for. Maybe it's something you're meant to test." Later that night, Luda couldn't sleep. She stepped outside barefoot, feeling the cold earth under her toes. The moon hung low and red, casting long shadows over the land. And there, far up the ridge where the hills folded into the night, a flicker of orange light blinked once, then again. A campfire. She could picture him there. Elias Whitfield, hat pulled low, tending to his horse, watching over the valley. The thought settled over her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant wolves. Luda closed her eyes and whispered the same word her mother used when she prayed over the fire. "Thank you." By morning, the fire was gone, and so were the hoof prints near the fence. But the burlap sack remained inside the cabin, empty and folded neatly on the shelf. It was strange, she thought, how a man could leave things behind. Bread, water, firewood, and somehow also leave hope, the kind that made even this dry, unforgiving land feel alive for one more day. The morning sun rose slow and red over the bluffs, staining the land in copper light. Luda May was halfway to the creek when she heard it, the faint, rhythmic thunder of hooves rolling through the still air. At first she thought it was the wind brushing the mesquite, but the sound grew heavier, sharper. 4 riders, maybe 5. She crouched low behind a cluster of prickly pear, her heart hammering against the tin edge of her bucket. Dust lifted in the distance like smoke. She could see them now, 4 men on horseback, guns slung low, their shadows cutting through the early haze. They rode without care, like the land already belonged to them. One man rode ahead of the others, tall and broad, a black hat pulled low over a scarred face. Hank Dobbs, known across counties for being a mean drunk and worse sober. To his right was Wade Cutter, with a bandolier crossing his chest and a face that looked carved from bad intentions. Behind them, Jesse Pike, red-haired and restless, twirled a pistol around his finger like it was a toy. The fourth, Roy Haskins, rode quiet, but kept his rifle across his saddle horn. They stopped on the ridge above the creek. Luda crouched lower, her breath caught in her throat. The wind carried their voices down to her, drawling, ugly words that made the air feel colder than morning should. "That's the spring they talk about," Dobbs said. "Never dries, even in July." "Belongs to that Apache woman," Jesse snorted. "She and the half-breed kid live out here alone." "Ain't right," Wade Cutter added. "A woman like that holding land when men got nothing." "We'll come back for it," Dobbs said, spitting into the dirt. "Soon as we finish up in town, that water'll be ours." Luda gripped her bucket so hard her knuckles went white. "Mama has to know." But before she could move, another figure rode out from the far side of the hill, Elias Whitfield. He didn't come fast. He came steady, calm, as if he were taking a morning ride through his own pasture. Dusty, his gray horse, moved smooth beneath him. The man's coat flared in the wind, and the sun flashed on the brass buckle of his gun belt. Dobbs turned in his saddle, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned. The preacher boy himself." Elias stopped a few paces short of them. His voice was quiet, but it carried clear. "That spring you're staring at, it's claimed land." Wade Cutter laughed. "Claimed by who? An Indian widow and her runt? You setting up charity now, Whitfield?" Elias's face stayed still. "It's hers," he said simply. "She's got every right to it." Dobbs's grin widened, showing yellow teeth. "You gone soft, rancher? Or you just sweet on redskins?" The silence that followed was thick as tar. Even the horses shifted uneasy. Elias's hand rested lightly on his revolver. "You boys ought to turn around," he said. "Ain't worth spilling blood over a spring." "Maybe not," Dobbs said, "but I've killed for less." He raised his rifle, not aiming, just showing it. Elias drew and fired a single shot into the dirt between Dobbs' horse's hooves. The animal reared, screaming. Dust exploded around them. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. "Next one won't miss," Elias said quietly. Wade Cutter swore under his breath. Jesse Pike steadied his mount, his face pale beneath the red hair. Dobbs spat again, glaring at Elias. "You just bought yourself a problem, Whitfield," he growled. "We'll be back, and when we come, we'll bring hell with us." He jerked his reins hard. The gang turned their horses and thundered off down the ridge, kicking up a storm of dust that hung long after they were gone. Luda stayed hidden until the wind swallowed the last echo of hooves. Then she ran, fast, light, her bare feet tearing through the brush. When she reached the cabin, her chest was tight with fear and something else. Relief. Ada May met her at the door. "What is it?" "Men," Luda gasped. "4 of them. They want the water, Mama. But Elias, he was there. He stopped them." Ada's eyes darkened. She looked out across the plain, where the ridge met the sun. "That man's got more courage than sense," she murmured. "He'll get himself killed trying to play savior." Luda bit her lip. "He saved us." Ada turned to her, placing a trembling hand on her daughter's cheek. "No, baby. He just bought us time. Don't confuse mercy with safety." That evening, the sky turned the color of dying embers. The air smelled of dry sage and gunpowder. Luda helped her mother gather sticks for the stove, though her hands still shook. Every sound, the creak of the cabin walls, the far-off call of a crow, made her glance toward the ridge. When she stepped outside to empty the wash water, she saw a man's silhouette moving slowly down the hill. It was Elias. He didn't come close this time. He stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and dropped something from his saddle, a bundle of split firewood bound with rope. Then, without a word, he tipped his hat toward the cabin and turned Dusty back toward the hills. Luda stood frozen in the doorway, her heart caught somewhere between gratitude and sorrow. She whispered, "Thank you," though she knew he couldn't hear her. When she turned to go inside, Ada was watching her from the shadows. "You see," her mother said softly, "ain't no lines straight in this world. Sometimes the ones you fear the most are the only ones who'll stand between you and the dark." That night, neither of them slept much. The wind moaned through the cracks in the walls, and coyotes called back and forth across the canyons. Luda lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the way Elias had faced those men, how he hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down. The world outside was still cruel and divided, but somewhere between the cabin and that far ridge, a thread had been tied, invisible, fragile, but real. And for the first time, she understood what her father once told her before he died. Some men don't need to speak to show what side they're on. She smiled faintly in the dark. Out beyond the hills, a lone wolf howled. The sound carried across the valley, mingling with the memory of gunfire in the echo of Elias's calm voice. That's land with someone living on it. When dawn came again, there was smoke rising from two chimneys, one from the Whitfield Ranch and one from the small Apache cabin below. Different fires, same wind. The wind came howling off the mesa that afternoon, hot and dry, sweeping dust across the valley like an old ghost that refused to rest. The day had been quiet until Elias Whitfield rode down the ridge again, Dusty's hooves sinking into the cracked clay. Luda May spotted him first from the yard, his figure shimmering in the heat haze, hat pulled low, coat whipping behind him. He carried something long wrapped in canvas across his saddle. Her mother, Ada May, looked up from hanging laundry, her face unreadable. "He's back," she murmured, half surprise, half resignation. Elias dismounted and tied Dusty to the fence post, then took off his hat, nodding politely toward Ada. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice carried calm, the kind that came from too many battles, the kind men used when they'd already seen what fear could do. Ada crossed her arms. "What brings you this time, Mr. Whitfield?" He unwrapped the canvas. Inside lay an old Springfield rifle, its wood darkened by years of use. "Thought the girl might need this," he said simply. "World's getting meaner every day." Ada stiffened. "She's just a child," Elias nodded. "I know, but she's a child living where the world forgets mercy." Luda watched silently, eyes darting between the two. Ada's jaw tightened. For a long while, only the wind spoke, tugging at the hem of Ada's dress, the wash line creaking in rhythm. Finally, Ada sighed. "You teach her then," she said. "But if she ends up broken like this land, it's on you." Elias gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." They started that evening behind the cabin where the land stretched open toward the west. The air smelled of mesquite and gun oil. Elias handed Luda the rifle. It was heavier than she expected. She gripped it awkwardly, the barrel wobbling as she tried to steady her aim. "First thing," he said, adjusting her stance, "don't fight it. Feel it. Rifle's like a horse. You pull too hard, it'll buck you. You go gentle, it'll do what you need." He moved her feet apart, one slightly forward. "Now breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Don't rush it." The world around them shrank until it was just the girl, the rifle, and the distant tin can sitting on a fence post 30 yards away. "Now," Elias said quietly, "when the wind stills, squeeze." The shot cracked through the air, sharp and raw. Luda flinched. The bullet kicked up dirt several feet wide of the target. "Missed," she said, cheeks red. Elias smiled faintly. "Good, means you're human. Try again." She reloaded, hands trembling slightly. The second shot came closer. The third hit dead center, knocking the tin can off the post. Luda lowered the rifle, eyes wide with disbelief. Then slowly, a smile tugged at her lips. The first real one since before her father died. Ada, watching from the doorway, pressed a hand to her heart. There was pride in her face, but also sorrow. As the light began to fade, Elias sat on a fallen log, cleaning the rifle. Luda crouched nearby, curious. He spoke without looking at her. "You know, I used to carry one of these for the cavalry patrol." Luda frowned. "You were a soldier?" He nodded once. "A long time ago. Thought I was fighting for something righteous. Turns out I was just following orders." She didn't say anything, waiting. Elias's voice dropped low. "We raided Apache camps near the Rio Concho. Burned them down. Men, women, children." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the rifle barrel. "My wife, Caroline, didn't know. When she found out, she couldn't look at me the same. Died sick the next winter, and I reckon some part of that sickness was me." The wind carried the sound of coyotes somewhere beyond the canyon. Finally, he said, "I owe a debt to the people I wronged. Maybe teaching you to shoot ain't much, but it's something." Luda stared at the dirt, unsure what to say. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Don't trust the mercy of men who once held a rifle against you. But Elias's face wasn't the face of a man looking for redemption through pride. It was one carved by guilt and the long ache of solitude. You can't pay back the dead, she said quietly. He nodded. No, but maybe I can keep the living alive a little longer. They trained until the sun bled into the hills. Luda's aim grew steady, her breath sure. The recoil no longer scared her. It anchored her. Each shot sent a plume of smoke into the wind, curling like memory. Elias stood behind her, correcting her shoulders, murmuring the same words every time. Don't fear the noise, Luda. Fear the reason you might need to make it. By the fifth target, she didn't need his guidance. She set the can on the post herself, took her position, and waited for the wind to die. One shot, clean. The tin spun into the air before clattering against the rock. Elias smiled, pride softening his worn features. Your father'd have been proud, he said. Luda turned, blinking hard. You didn't know him? No, Elias said, but I know the kind of man who leaves this much fight in a girl. They said little after that. The air cooled as night crept over the valley. The horizon glowed red-orange, the last light fading behind the jagged line of hills. Elias packed the rifle, slinging it over his shoulder. You'll be fine, he said, mounting Dusty. You and your mama both. You got more grit than half the men I ever rode with. Luda stepped closer. Will they come back? The men from the ridge? He adjusted his reins. Men like that always come back, but next time, they'll find you ready. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with unspoken trust, the kind that grows in the space between danger and mercy. Elias tipped his hat. Keep the rifle oiled, he said, and keep your heart steady. Then he turned and rode back toward the setting sun, the sound of Dusty's hooves fading into the wind. When he was gone, Luda stood there, the rifle heavy but sure in her hands, the barrel still warm, smoke rising faintly like a whisper. Ada came out and laid a hand on her shoulder. He shouldn't have done that, she murmured. I wanted to learn, Luda said. Ada's eyes softened. Just promise me you'll only use it when the earth itself can't protect you. Luda nodded, eyes still fixed on the fading trail where Elias had vanished. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rumbled. Or maybe it was just the wind chasing ghosts through the canyons again. Either way, she knew one thing for certain. Fear would never rule her again. As the first stars appeared, she fired one last shot into the twilight, the echo rolling across the land like a vow. The wind carried the smell of rain that would never fall. It was the kind of night that made dogs restless and horses twitch in their stalls. A bad night. The moon was a thin, crooked blade hanging above the hills, cutting through a sky full of drifting clouds. Inside the small Apache cabin, Luda May sat by the window, her rifle across her knees. The old Springfield Elias had given her felt heavier tonight. Her mother, Ada May, dozed fitfully on the cot. The fever had returned, her breath shallow and wheezing. The oil lamp flickered low, throwing long shadows across the walls. Somewhere far out on the plain, a single horse neighed, followed by the faint clink of metal. Luda froze. Then came the sound she dreaded most, hoofbeats, more than one, rolling over the dry earth like thunder. She moved to the window and looked out. The horizon shimmered with orange pinpricks of fire, torches. They're back, she whispered. Hank Dobbs rode at the front of 6 men, his black hat tilted low, a whiskey bottle in one hand and his revolver in the other. Wade Cutter, scar glinting in the torchlight, followed close behind. Jesse Pike, Roy Haskins, and 2 new faces brought up the rear. The men were drunk, mean, and eager for trouble. Let's see if that half-breed girl's still fetching water, Dobbs snarled. I told Whitfield we'd come back, didn't I? They laughed, harsh, ugly laughter that carried down the valley. At the cabin, Luda shook her mother awake. Mama, she whispered, they're here. Ada opened her eyes, coughing hard. She tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't hold. Get the gun, she rasped. Bar the door. Luda grabbed the rifle, her hands trembling but steady enough. Ada leaned against the wall, holding Tom Whitfield's old revolver. Her face was pale but fierce. If they mean to take this land, they'll pay for every foot of it. The riders came fast, shouting, waving torches. The horses' hooves kicked up clouds of dust that glowed like ghosts in the moonlight. One bullet smashed through the cabin window before the men even stopped. Luda ducked, glass scattering over her hair. "Come on out, Apache girl," Dobbs hollered. "We'll make it quick if you do." No one answered. He spat, motioning to his men. "Burn it down." Jesse Pike stepped forward, torch raised, then froze when a gunshot split the night. The bullet hit the dirt inches from his boots. The shot came from the ridge. Elias Whitfield. His rifle cracked again, echoing across the valley. Another torch fell, hissing out in the dust. Dobbs cursed. "Whitfield, damn fool sticking his nose in again." He fired toward the ridge, but Elias's next shot knocked the pistol clean out of his hand. "Get the others," Dobbs barked. Wade Cutter and Roy Haskins dismounted, spreading out toward the cabin. Shots tore through the night. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Luda peered through the shattered window, her heart pounding. She saw Wade creeping behind a wagon wheel, his rifle raised. She remembered Elias's words. "Don't fear the noise. Fear the reason you might need to make it." She aimed, breathed in, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. Wade Cutter dropped to his knees, clutching his side. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then chaos. Dobbs charged forward, shouting, "Burn that shack!" Elias fired again from the ridge, the muzzle flash lighting his face for an instant. One of Dobbs' men fell off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Luda reloaded clumsily, her hands slick with sweat. She heard her mother's revolver go off, once, twice, then the sharp metallic click of an empty chamber. Ada May's voice called out, hoarse and fierce, "This land ain't yours to take." A bullet tore through the doorframe, missing her by inches. She fell back, the revolver slipping from her grasp. Luda fired again, hitting Jesse Pike's horse in the leg. The animal screamed and collapsed, throwing the rider into the dirt. Jesse crawled toward the barn, swearing, but didn't get far. Elias's rifle cracked again, and he went still. That left only Dobbs and one other, both half-crazed and desperate. Dobbs turned, fury twisting his face. "You'll die for this, Whitfield," he shouted. He raised his rifle toward the ridge, and Luda stepped out of the doorway, her figure framed in the flickering light of the burning torches. The wind whipped her hair, eyes glowing like amber. "Leave," she said quietly. Dobbs sneered. "Or what, little Apache?" She didn't answer. The rifle barked once more, echoing through the valley. Dobbs's hat flew off his head as he stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his side, gasping as blood spread through the dirt. The last man turned his horse and fled into the darkness, his shouts fading down the canyon. And just like that, it was over. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and iron. The firelight danced across the ground, flickering over 3 lifeless bodies. Elias rode down from the ridge, his rifle slung across his back. His face was lined with exhaustion, his shirt streaked with sweat and dust. He dismounted and went to Luda, resting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, just looked up at him, eyes hollow but steady. Ada sat on the porch step, breathing hard, her revolver empty beside her. "Is it done?" she asked. Elias nodded. "It's done." The 3 of them stood in silence, the only sound the crackle of dying flames and the distant cry of a nightbird. When dawn finally broke, Elias helped Luda dig graves behind the ridge. The ground was hard, but they worked until the sun climbed high. They buried Dobbs and his men side by side, without words, without markers. The earth took them, same as it took everyone eventually. When the last shovel of dirt fell, Elias leaned on his spade, looking toward the horizon. "You did what you had to," he said. Luda wiped her hands on her skirt. "I didn't want to." "Good," he said softly. "Means you're still human." Back at the cabin, Ada waited, wrapped in a blanket. She looked at her daughter, streaked with dirt and sweat, the rifle slung across her back. "Come here," she whispered. Luda knelt beside her. Ada brushed a hand over her cheek, her voice barely above a breath. "You're not a child anymore, Luda. You're blood of the Apache and blood of this land. Don't ever forget, you belong to both." Luda pressed her forehead to her mother's shoulder. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the scent of gunpowder and mesquite into the open sky. The valley was quiet once more, but it was a different kind of quiet. the kind that comes after the earth has drunk its fill of blood. And as the sun climbed over Red Creek, the land seemed to whisper in return. The girl with the iron bucket was gone. In her place stood a woman who would never run again. By noon the next day, Red Creek was buzzing like a kicked anthill. Word of the shootout had traveled fast. 3 men dead, 2 wounded, one of them limping back to town with more whiskey than blood left in him. Folks whispered names like Hank Dobbs and Wade Cutter, spat into the dust, and said it was bound to happen sooner or later. When Sheriff Frank Doolin rode out toward the Whitfield land, even the wind seemed to hush. He was a tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes that didn't match the badge on his chest. His horse Granger trotted slow up the ridge, carrying the weight of both the law and the man beneath it. At the top of the rise, he spotted Elias Whitfield waiting for him by the split-rail fence. Elias's shirt was streaked with dirt and sweat, his hat low, his rifle leaning against a post. Behind him, the small cabin stood quiet. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. Frank dismounted, boots crunching on dry earth. "Mornin', Elias," he said, voice steady but soft. "Heard there was some trouble up this way." Elias nodded once. "You heard right." Frank sighed, glancing toward the hills. 3 dead men, 2 more hightailed it back to town. Wade Cutter's bleeding through his shirt, swearing you ambushed them. Says they were just passing through. Elias's jaw tightened. They weren't passing through. They came to take what wasn't theirs. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the cabin again, where Luda May was sweeping the porch. She stopped when she saw him, clutching the broom handle like a weapon. "Who's the girl?" Frank asked. Elias didn't miss a beat. "She's my hired help. Works the place since my foreman left." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Hired help, huh?" His gaze lingered on the girl's dark braids and the way she didn't quite meet his eyes. "I don't see no Apache around here," Frank said finally, almost to himself. "Never have." Elias's eyes held his. "Then best we both keep it that way." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Only the buzz of cicadas filled the space between them. Frank let out a breath and rubbed his neck. "You always were a damn fool, Whitfield," he said. "You could have told me the truth." "I just did," Elias answered quietly. The sheriff looked out toward the horizon. "These hills have long memories. Folks down there, they don't forget who's supposed to belong where." Elias didn't answer. He knew. He'd spent years trying to forget his own part in those memories. Finally, Frank swung himself back onto his horse. "I'll file it as self-defense," he said. "Hell, I don't reckon those men deserved another sunrise anyway." He tugged the reins, then paused, his tone softening. "Just do me a favor, Elias. Don't let me have to come back here. Next time I ride up, I don't want to see any reason to remember what I might have missed today." Their eyes met one last time, law and conscience, standing on the same patch of dust. Then Frank turned his horse and rode away, the badge on his chest catching the afternoon light before disappearing into the heat haze. Inside the cabin, Ada May sat near the window, her face pale but alert. When Elias entered, she didn't rise. "He knows," she said simply. Elias nodded. "He knows enough to keep his mouth shut." Ada studied him for a long moment. "You lied for us. You risked your own name." Elias leaned against the doorframe, looking older than the day before. "I've done worse things for worse people." Luda stood nearby, hands folded tight. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. He met her gaze, tired but clear. "Because sometimes truth don't keep folks alive. Lies do." Ada's eyes softened. "Then we owe you a debt that can't be paid." Elias shook his head. "You don't owe me nothing. I sleep better knowing those men won't hurt anyone else." For a while, silence filled the room, the kind that only comes after gunfire. The silence of the living trying to make sense of why they still are. That evening, Elias came back one last time. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the world in gold and blood. He carried something small in his hand, a silver pendant shaped like a hawk, strung on a worn leather cord. He found Luda outside, sitting on the porch steps, staring at the hills. The air was cooler now, and the smell of gunpowder had finally faded. Elias sat down beside her, wordless for a moment. Then he held out the pendant. "This belonged to my daughter," he said quietly. "Her name was Little Sparrow." Luda touched the charm carefully, the metal still warm from his palm. "What happened to her?" "Fever," he said. voice rough. Long time ago, I was off fighting a war I didn't believe in anymore. Never got to say goodbye. He cleared his throat. She used to wear this whenever I rode out. Said it kept me safe. Maybe it did for a while. He looked at her, eyes glinting with something halfway between grief and hope. Now I figure it's her turn to watch over you. Luda hesitated. I can't take this. Yes, you can, Elias said. She'd want you to. He looped the cord gently around her neck, the silver hawk resting against her collarbone. Keep it close, he said. It's the kind of faith a man can't earn twice. Ada watched from the doorway, her eyes bright in the fading light. Thank you, she whispered. Elias tipped his hat. Ain't nothing to thank me for. But as he stood to leave, Ada's voice followed him. There's something I want you to know, Elias. You may have worn that cavalry uniform once, but tonight, you stood like one of us. He paused, half-turned, then nodded. Maybe that's what redemption looks like. The stars came out one by one, sharp as cut glass. The prairie wind carried the smell of sage and the faint memory of smoke. Luda sat on the porch long after Elias had gone, turning the silver hawk over in her hand. It caught the moonlight, glinting like a promise. Her mother came to stand beside her. That man risked everything for us, Ada said. Don't you ever forget it. I won't, Luda replied softly. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote called, lonely, mournful, free. And as the wind swept across the dark fields, carrying away the scent of gunfire and fear, Luda whispered into the night, Thank you, little sparrow. The charm gleamed against her skin, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the land breathe easy again. The wind that morning carried the faint metallic scent of gun oil and dew. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath before something ends. Elias Whitfield stood near the corral, saddling Dusty, his old gray horse. His face was drawn, the creases around his eyes deeper than usual. He moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who already knew there was no coming back once he mounted up. Luda May stood nearby, clutching the silver hawk pendant at her neck. She'd barely slept since the night the sheriff came. The earth still carried the dark marks where they'd buried the dead, but now new danger was rising, the kind that wore a uniform and claimed righteousness for it. Elias tightened the saddle straps, glancing toward the eastern ridge. Cavalry patrol's been spotted down by the Brazos, he said quietly. They're sweeping north. Apache bands, stragglers, anyone caught between gets run out, or worse. Ada May sat in the doorway, wrapped in her blanket. Her cough had grown worse, voice thin and ragged. You mean us, she said. Elias hesitated. If they see me here, protecting Apache folk, they'll hang me before sundown. He looked away. And they won't stop with me. Luda shook her head fiercely. Then we'll hide you. There's room in the cellar, or up in the hills. He stopped her with a look. You think men who burned whole camps to the ground won't find one old rancher and a sick woman? He shook his head, voice steady but kind. No, girl. They'll find me, and they'll find you. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind lifted Ada's hair, and the dry grass rippled like waves. You don't have to go, Luda said softly, tears blurring her eyes. Not after everything. Elias stepped closer, kneeling so his eyes met hers. The morning light caught the scar along his jaw, the kind no one earned without sin. Luta, he said gently, you've got a strength most grown men don't understand. You've walked through more fire than a child should. That blood in you, it's Apache and it's Whitfield. It means you belong to both the land and the wind. You don't bow to either. Her tears came then, hot, silent, unstoppable, the first since her father's death. Elias wiped them away with the rough back of his hand. Don't waste tears on what has to be done, he said. You keep that hawk close, and you remember, being kind in a world like this is its own kind of fight. Ada's voice trembled from behind them. You sound like a preacher with a broken heart. Elias smiled faintly, eyes never leaving Luda's. Maybe I am. He finished saddling Dusty, checking the rifle and canteen. The old horse pawed the dirt restlessly, as if sensing the road ahead would be long. Luda followed him to the edge of the yard. Where will you go? Elias shrugged. West, maybe, toward the Pecos. There's country out there where a man can still be nobody. She tried to smile. You'll come back? His silence said more than words. Ada watched from the porch, her breath thin. Elias, she said weakly, if you make it past the river, find peace. Don't come back here. Not unless the world turns kind again. He tipped his hat. Ma'am, I don't reckon I'd recognize it if it did. He mounted Dusty, the leather creaking beneath him. The wind shifted, carrying the distant beat of drums. No, hooves, echoing faintly from the southern ridge. Cavalry. He turned his horse toward the rising sun. Time's run out. Luda grabbed his boot as if she could anchor him to the ground. Wait. She pulled something from her pocket, a small piece of cloth, hand-stitched with uneven thread. Mom and I made this. It's nothing much. He took it gently, unfolding it to find a tiny embroidered feather, rough but earnest. I'll carry it, he said, right next to my heart. Shapiturninum. Then he looked one last time at the two of them, the dying woman and the girl with the steady eyes, and nodded. The world don't deserve you, he said softly, but it sure as hell needs you. He rode out just as the first edge of the sun broke over the hills, gold spilling across the land like forgiveness. Luda watched until the dust swallowed him whole. The sound of hooves faded, but the ache in her chest did not. Behind her, Ada coughed again, weaker than before. Luda rushed to her side. Mama, she whispered. Ada smiled faintly. He'll live, she murmured. Men like him. God don't take 'em easy. Luda nodded, blinking away the blur in her eyes. Ada reached up, her hand trembling. Listen to me, child. If you live long enough, you'll see that mercy's a weapon too. Don't ever be ashamed of it. I won't, Mama. Ada's eyes softened, their fire dimming but never going out. Good, she whispered. Then you've already won. The wind carried the scent of cedar through the open door. Outside, the land shimmered, bright and endless. Ada leaned back against the wall, her breath slowing, the corners of her lips curved in peace. By mid-morning, the light turned silver-white. Luda filled her iron bucket at the creek, as she had 100 times before. The reflection of the sky rippled in the water, broken by her hands, then stilled again. She walked across the field, her shadow long and sure beneath her. The hawk pendant glinted against her chest, catching every ray of sun. From the ridge above, a sudden flash of light caught her eye, a glint, brief and bright, like the reflection of metal. Her breath caught. Was it Elias, a farewell from a distant hill, or just the sun rising over the rifle of a man long gone? It didn't matter, because Luda May knew, somewhere out there, beyond the dust and cruelty, he was still watching. Maybe not in body, but in spirit. And for the first time in years, the world didn't feel so empty. That evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the hills in fire, Luda stood outside the cabin and whispered to the wind, her voice calm and sure. I'll keep the water full, Mama, and I'll keep my heart clean. The hawk pendant caught the last light of the dying day, burning gold. The girl who once carried water alone now carried something far heavier, hope. And as night gave way to the promise of dawn, she walked back across the field, her reflection shimmering in the bucket's rippling surface, her steps steady, her spirit unbroken.